one endpoint to search for a given deploy, passing in the user and timestamp, and then finding that block that contains that deploy. We have that depth flag added to show main chain and show blocks, and the listen at name gRPC endpoints. And there is one, we had a bug related to how we were trying to reattempt passing around blocks. Essentially, we would sometimes clear the block dependencies faster than, or we would clear them out before they were actually ready to be cleared. So we would have had some cases in which you would have to re-ask for a block before you ended up adding it. And so that's fixed. And then we have some unit test fixes. Yep. Yeah, so that's the implementation updates in a nutshell.
Cool. That's actually, I think also, I don't know if you and Meta have spoken, but both of you have a significant interest in the R-chain improvement process, or RIP. So Kent has some pretty well elaborated ideas. Meta,
I can't hear Greg. Can anyone else hear Greg?
Oh,
I can hear Greg.
Meta, can you hear me?
I didn't hear any of that, but I don't know. It may have been me.
No, I was just saying that Kent has some elaborated ideas on the R-chain improvement process.
Oh, wonderful. Excellent.
Yeah, you guys should definitely talk, because I really like what Kent was saying. I think that'd be, and we need to get that in place. We basically have to start drafting now, so that by mainnet we have a clear, or even before mainnet we have a clear process. Especially, we're at this nice point where we only have a few community members that are contributing, but we, hopefully, fingers crossed, the floodgates start opening and we have a lot more community members engaging. And in which case we really are going to need an improvement process that is self-governed. So you guys should talk.
I will find some time.
Okay, awesome. The one theoretical thing that I've been thinking about, or the spec level thing I've been thinking about, is the idea that I had to write to sort of provide a much simpler equational specification is at odds with the one aspect of the way CVC Casper is conceptualized, and that is that so in the way that I was thinking about it, the validators could control which continuations of each validator was allowed to go forward on the basis of the information about equivocation and other potential slashing conditions. And that's kind of, it's a little bit different than CVC style, where in the CVC style Casper, how do I say this? There isn't uh mm, it's like each validator is proceeding with its own version of reality. And so they don't really, it's only the fact that each version of reality effectively converges, that that uh, allows them to proceed. But in some way, they're actually all proceeding in isolation, apart from the passing of messages. Whereas in the other approach, the it, it it's their actual behavior is it comes under the control of consensus, right? And that's so there's a subtle difference between these two approaches. And I realized that you could potentially bring them closer into alignment, um, uh, uh, by separating. Uh, how do I say this? You can you don't necessarily know which. So each continuation can be running in isolation, but you don't necessarily know which continuation sort of has the talking stick, so to speak. Um, so I'm sure this sounds very vague and hand wavy, but what it comes down to is um, that uh, 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 code continues. The continuation code can continue to run, but that code may or may not have uh, any ability to influence future behavior, and that achieves the same kind of isolation that you have in the way Vlad has organized CBC, Casper. And again, the whole point here, the whole point of this exercise is to be able to write this down in a handful of equations instead of pages and pages, um, because it's just the existing CBC spec is harder to reason about equationally. And what we'd like to be able to do is to reason about this equationally so that we can get to the point where we can check it automatically. And moreover, that being able to check it automatically is related to the code. It's one thing to write down the theory in some formal system like Koch or Hall or Isabel or any of those, and then but then have no way to correlate that to the code. If we can write it down in the row calculus, then we have a ghost of a chance of being able to correlate it against Roland code, which at least is half the battle. Casper is sort of half. Well, I don't know what the distribution of code is right now, but it's sort of split across Roland and Scala. And so the aim would be to get as much of this spec in something that's as close to our implementation as possible, so that we can then check our implementation against the spec in an automated fashion. So that's why I continue to do this work, even though it's likely that this kind of automated formal proof of verification won't happen until well into Venus.
So, Greg, I have a couple questions about what you just said.
Sure.
And so, like, are you trying to, for example, just replicate the transactions themselves? Is that what you were going for, maybe? Like, I'm still trying to get clear grasp of what sort of is the blocker on CBC for these equations.
Yeah. So the idea is like this. Sorry, that my daughter was just trying to contact me. So what I was thinking about is it's very very easy in row calculus to control which continuation um, uh, uh, goes forward, right? So if you imagine, and there's actually a form for every process. Like you can prove that every process can be rewritten in a kind of continuation saturated style, where the next where the continuation of a for comprehension, um, that for comprehension actually has to go to a particular channel to get the next piece of code to run, right? And that's in fact the whole trick that I used in order to come up with my initial draft of a cost model, right? Or not cost model, but of phlogiston, right? So that little, you know, 4-page paper that I wrote, where I show that you can take any process and turn it into a process where the continuation is stored somewhere else, and then you have to go to that thing and present proof that you have resources in order to start running that. um, so that's what enables you to introduce a notion of gas or phlogiston. So, but you could use the same approach for consensus, right? You could say that you don't get to run the continuation unless everybody agrees that the past behavior of this process has been in conformance, right? And the judgment of that past behavior being in conformance is essentially all of the conditions we have around slashing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm starting to get it a bit better. And so, like, you would you would get the right to run. So, does everyone
Basically,
still
you get the right to
run?
keep running your code, right?
Yeah. So, like, does everyone end up running each piece of code though?
Well, that's the trick, is that everyone ends up everyone gets entangled in terms of running the code, and that's what I was trying to separate out, because it's not like CVC where everyone's effectively running in isolation, right? Every validator is just like running their own. It's like they're in their own little world, and the only thing between them and complete solipsism is the fact that they receive messages, and then whether or not they process them is still you know um up for grabs. um does that make sense?
Yes. So, like, even like hypothetically, once we find this solution, like all the validators will run like whatever they're sort of entangled to be run, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And
But the trick is that they could continue to run. How do I say this? uh they could continue to think that the continuation is running. And in fact, it could still be running, but it may not be the continuation that everyone else is listening to.
that would
That would be the same. That would achieve the same effect as the current CBC style, right? So the current CBC style is, again, this. They're all just running as if they were in isolation. Um, and and then they just process messages. And then, but their view of what the chain is their own view. It's not. So you could do the same thing, that everyone's view of the continuation that's running is their own view.
So I guess I'm having trouble figuring out like the difference between sort of what we have now and if it like is turning what we have now into some kind of transaction level replication not the same thing. Like it feels sort of
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I understand what you mean by replication. Yeah, but I mean, every replication can be turned into a recursion, right? And that's effectively what I'm doing. I'm turning I'm turning the replicated body of the. So if you think about it, every server like entity is a replicated process, right? It forks off a copy of the server code to serve a particular request.
yep, that makes sense.
And you can turn um, every replication into a recursion, right? So the the recursion receives a request, and then forks off a copy, and then and then recurses going back to receiving the request, right? So that's the
Okay. Mhm.
right. So that's the correspondence there. And then what I've said is, at that point where you um uh where you handle the request, um you inject a like a traffic cop, that is or you inject some decider, right, where the decider is checking to see whether or not you are allowed to continue, right? And that roughly corresponds to collating all the information what about messages, about equivocation and slashing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. So I guess yeah, this if you use treating the validators as a bunch of replicated processes sort of
Yes.
clicks better. So if that's the case, all the malicious processes don't really like because they're running things like you can't stop a malicious validator from running for
Correct.
themselves, right?
That's
So
correct. They can run for themselves, but the
mhm.
question is, what do other processes do with interacting with them?
Yeah, so and that's sort of like the slashing part, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you say you have like a traffic cop, you this is for I guess this model doesn't quite I guess I don't see it in the sense for other validators, right? That are
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm trying to get at. Is that the difference between the traffic cop model and the CVC model is CVC doesn't have a traffic cop. It's that everyone uh, has their own decision making process that they go through as to what they do about those messages.
mm, I see. And I guess it will be pretty hard, or maybe just because of the way I've been thinking for a long while now, how to, yeah, integrate that traffic cop into other validator views or
Right. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, is that there's a way to reconcile the two viewpoints, right? So the way to reconcile it is that the malicious character or the malicious agent can still think that it's running its continuation, but the rest of the world believes that the continuation of record is going to be the one that conforms to the slashing conditions. So from their point of view, the continuation, for example, if it's completely slashed, the continuation is just the null process or the zero process, right? That's the process that they believe is the appropriate continuation for that entity.
I see. And so you would have a continuation for each of your other validators? Is that
Yes, that's right. So your view of the other validators is that you have a continuation. You see, a particular continuation for them.
okay? Okay. If that's the case, it's sort of like we have a bonding map right now, right? Written in Rolang.
Yes, exactly. Right, right. And that,
And
yes, yes, yes. Yeah.
so if you set someone's bond to 0, it's sort of as if their process has become nil, right?
Yes. That's right. And that's exactly why I like this model, is because it lines up with that everyone has to maintain a bonding view, right? They have to know that for this particular so you can think of uh, this view that they're maintaining is stake to continuation, or it's a little bit more than that, but basically stake to continuation, right? So if the stake is gone to the 0 continuation, uh, then it's as if they've been slashed to the bone, so to speak.
Okay, okay. So it seems like what you've described can then be it's more sort of like a conceptual matter than I mean, on the implementation side, it's effectively if you just need to switch all these Scala bits of code to Rolang, right? I mean, I say just, but like,
Yeah, that's right. And
right, like,
ultimately the form of the automatic proof, or the formal proof that the implementation of the protocol is correct, in my opinion, goes roughly like this. So we write down a spec entirely in Rolang. We check that spec in a theorem prover, which we construct basically from the work that Mike and I are doing on Ladle. All right. Once we get that spec is correct within the theorem prover, then to the implementation, the parts that are in Rolang, we just check them against the spec. Right. The parts that are in Scala, we prove that the Scala is equivalent to the spec. Right, using either by hand techniques, or using one of these systems that has been developed for a Java or a toy Java, right? Because we can go from the Scala to the Java and then prove that the Java behaves accordingly, right? And if we can constrain the Java that's produced to something that's inside featherweight Java or something like that, then we have a ghost of a chance of actually automatically proving that piece of the puzzle also conforms to the spec. So it's still got a lot of moving parts, but we can potentially, in a modular fashion, piece together an automated proof of the whole system end to end. At least that's what I'm shooting for.
yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, I guess that's it for us this week. And I will. Thanks for getting up so early, Kent.
I have a question.
Yes.
Am I correct that once you propose a block, you're committed to it?
No, you're not, as of now, like committed to it in the sense that you can always end up choosing a block from someone else that conflicts with yours and go with that. If they have, for example, if they have higher weight, that would be like a simple way. Or if someone else with higher weight decides to propose on top of their block, that would be another way you would be incentivized, or not incentivized, but like be forced to switch according to the ghost rule.
Yeah, I wish I had the patience to follow all the math. I just kind of have to trust that it's computationally bound. I look at the human communication side is how when you get a proposal, you modify it and send it back and come up with a proposal you both can agree on. And I'm wondering how this process works in Casper and how it can be bounded if it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, Casper doesn't have that flavor, Jim. It's not nearly as human. So the validators are not they're not reconciling, so to speak. The ghost rule is as close to the reconciliation process.
Is there anything to prevent you from writing that in Rolang to do that process?
No, you could do you mean a reconciliation style process? No, there's nothing in principle that would prevent, but you have to come up with a reconciliation process that that sort of has clear utility. I mean, it's a really interesting notion. It's a really interesting idea, but I've never seen anyone come up with an automated reconciliation process. Right?
Well, that's what we're trying to do for the community.
Yeah. In some ways, I don't believe that that kind of thing can be entirely automated. I think it's really good that it requires judgment.
I have a quick off-topic question. Who might sponsor the work in our GraphQL interface to Erlang? Dan came on for the $300 this month. And we don't really have a sponsor yet.
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, let me give it a think.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Okay, with that, I probably should jump off, and I'll see you guys at the Dev Stand Up.
Thanks.